the four main questions: who controls the finances of the UK? Who controls the political establishment? Who controls the land and seas? And who controls the national doctrine? These are important questions that we'll go through and explain as to why and how. In 1215, the lords and barons got together and basically forced the hand of King John. This was known as the Magna Carta. They made him sign, basically taking away the divine rights of power, which was total control of the monarchy, and it was to spread it out amongst the lords, the barons, the church, the crown estate, the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, which are private estates of the monarchy. The Magna Carta, 1215, it's not really part of UK law anymore, but it is the foundation of common law and the Bill of Rights, and a lot of countries around the world, such as Canada, Australia, the United States, they've all used similar forms of common law as a way of protecting their citizens and giving more power. So the aristocracy back in 1215 gained 55% of control of the lands. The land will always be owned by the monarchy. Every little part of the land, even the land that I'm sitting on now, is owned by the monarchy. When you buy a house, you just buy the rights, the naming rights to the deeds, basically, meaning you can try and ask permission to build a house on that land or whatever you wanted to do with that land, but the Queen outright owns that land, or the monarch, you should say. Now we're going to go into the feudal system. The monarchy, the barons, the knights and the peasants at the bottom. The land was owned by the king, and although the land is responsible and he's responsible for all his subjects, he delegated a lot of that responsibility to the barons, and the barons were responsible for the knights, who sort of waged war on behalf of the barons and the king, and the peasants had no rights at all and just lived on the land and basically grew food for the barons. And a set of barons, there'd be maybe 10 barons around the country, and within the baron land there would be lords and ladies who would control even smaller parcels of land. Basically came through just after the Magna Carta was signed. William the Conqueror in 1066, the Normans tried to take that power. So like I was saying, you have the kings at the top ruling the lands, the earls and the barons, there'd be probably maybe 10, 12 around the country, and then the knights would rule all the castles of the land, and they would wage war on behalf of the king and the earls and the barons, and then the peasants at the bottom would work the lands. That is basically the feudal system. They say it doesn't exist anymore, but it basically does. It's just in a different economic form nowadays. control of the lands from 1215 to 1882, because this settled land acts came into power. That's another thing you're going to need to get familiar with when normal peasants, you could say, serfs, were allowed to buy land and pass it on to future people. And if you look from 1882 to the present day, this is how the land is divided up. The Crown Estate has hardly lost any. Church of England, it lost practically 95% of all of its land. The Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall have halved their land. A lot of corporations have taken over, landlords. The barons lost half of their wealth. A lot of lords and barons, I suppose they died off, lost their wealth, sold their lands. But the Crown Estate has remained pretty similar to what it was. Homeowners, around about 5% of the land, they're registered to 5% of the land. So, if we just take a look, who controls the land and the seas? The monarchy controls the land and the seas, and they dish out responsibility to the lords and the barons, and it's actually still the same today, because the House of Lords, they always get the final say on laws. So the monarchy are at the top, and the link between the monarchy and the government of the UK is the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. They make decisions on behalf of the Queen in matters of the government. So the Queen and the King are at the top, and then the lands are all controlled by the aristocracy, the archdukes, the princes, the dukes, the duchesses, the sovereign princes, the marquesses, the counts, the earls, the viscounts, the barons, the baronesses, the baronets, the knights, the chevaliers, the ladies, the dames, the ministerials. These are all part of the aristocracy, and I would say, on estimate, it's around about 300 to 400 families that all have and control vast swathes of land, massive corporations, farming, fishing. That's one thing about Brexit, is people are saying they want to get the fishing waters back and the farming back, but the aristocracy already own all of this, so it will just pass from being shared amongst the rest of Europe to being controlled by a small number of aristocracy families who have controlled these lands for all these years. They've just made a lot of money through the quotas that the EU shared amongst the community. So then, what controls and keeps all of this power together and behind sort of closed doors? I would say is the establishment, which makes up the UK Parliament, which represents the people, apparently. The Supreme Court, which is a go-between the EU and the UK. The House of Lords, which is a go-between the establishment and the aristocracy and the government. which represents and works for the monarch and the people. And gluing all this together is Whitehall. It's quite an important part of the establishment. It's where all the civil servants work out and hash out a lot of the new laws coming in, and amendments and government policy. Just going up to an important point up here. Who controls the national doctrine? I would say it's Whitehall. It's quite an important part. They control what's going on within the establishment, and then it gets passed out around the four main parts. So the UK Parliament is where 650 members are voted by the people, and they are supposedly meant to represent the will of the people. Basically create, approve and scrutinise laws, and this costs around about £500 million a year, because they're paying 650 members £80,000 salary a year, plus there's lots of civil servants to pay, lawyers, bankers, lobbyists. It's all part of this little system. Nextly, you have the House of Lords, which represents the unwritten constitution, because we don't have a written constitution. It's an uncodified constitution where the Magna Carta made up the base for common law and the Bill of Rights, and then a number of acts on top of that kind of makes up the unwritten constitution of how we are governed in this country. But their primary role is they act as a safeguard. Basically, they act as a safeguard for the aristocracy. You then have the Supreme Court, which represents the rule of law, as well as it's kind of the level playing field between the EU and the UK, and has been for a number of years. Their primary role is to uphold the law. But it's been very pro-EU. So when the House of Commons, all 655 members, they represent their own parties, and usually there's about 4 or 5 different parties within the House of Commons, and the largest party will then usually go and form the government, which represents the will of the majority, and they put forward laws and run government. Yeah, it's quite an integral part of how the UK is run, and that costs around £43 million a year. They have protection from the MI6, which is Secret Intelligence Service, and the GCHQ. Now, the Prime Minister would usually have a meeting with both of these on a weekly basis, as well as the monarch will. Just to see what's going on internally and around the globe. And the monarch represents the UK, and they sign all the bills into law once Parliament and the House of Lords have decided upon, and then the government is executed. This makes up the separation of powers, the current United Kingdom of Great Britain's separation of powers. The Prime Minister is the leader of the largest party who's formed government, and he will usually put bills forward to the monarch. He is the go-between the government and the monarchy, pretty similar to the Privy Council is to the government. That's their way back. And then the Prime Minister will then sit amongst the EU Council, or did sit amongst the EU Council. Sorry, not anymore. So we've mentioned the separation of powers in modern day, control of the establishment, which works for the aristocracy, which is controlled by the monarchy, which is all elected by the people. I would say we live in a stratified class system where you have different forms of social class. The underclass is homeless people, people who have no identity. You could say travellers. They don't have passports, birth certificates. They would make up the underclass, or even the non-existent class. You then have the social class, which is disabled people, people who can't work, people who can't be asked to work, people who are finding it hard to find work. There's a lot of categories in there. It's where benefits, nowadays it's gone into the universal credits scheme or something. The City of London's quite a powerful entity. It's been around since the Romans were there, and the Romans tried to get rid of it. They couldn't. The Normans tried. The Vatican tried. The EU tried. The Nazis tried. The aristocracy tried. Even the monarchy tried by building the City of Westminster as a way of competing with the City of London. But it never really transcribed, never really happened. The City of London's always been the great power of the world and kind of always will be. It's a sovereign city-state, not part of the UK or England. It does run under some rules, does allow certain things, but it is its own city-state. It's an archaic form of governance where it's kind of like a rotten borough where the City of London Corporation pack one side with a certain person they want in control. It's where a lot of arms companies are, energy, financial, big place for all the climate change and carbon trading. A lot of law firms. It's where all the world's big banks are. Deutsche Bank, UBS, Chinese banks, Rothschilds, the Schroders. Going all day, the amount of things. It's also got its own 700 police officers and its own Lord Mayor. And to become Lord Mayor of the City of London is one of the hardest things you could possibly do. We're not talking Sadiq Khan here. Certainly not talking Sadiq Khan. He is the mayor of the boroughs of London. So yeah, we mentioned the separation of powers. The House of Lords, House of Commons, the largest party then forms the government. The Supreme Court holds the rule of law. It all protects the monarchy. So financially, how does this all happen? You have a system called the incorporated system within the Bank of England, where all the banks hold an account at the Bank of England, and my money, your money, everyone's money within bank accounts within the UK are held at the Bank of England. And the Bank of England then allows the incorporated banks to loan your money. They create new money, essentially, and they add a tax called signerage. At the moment, I think it's 0.015% tax on every transaction that's creates money. And per year, to the HM Treasury, this is around about £5 billion that comes into the economy. Whether it goes back into the economy, I don't know, but that just is how it happens. HM Revenue is obviously the tax office. They take money off everyone and then share it amongst the departments. Department for Work and Pensions, the Ministry of Defence, Home Office, Department of Health, and so on. There's lots of departments. We've mentioned the City of London. Now, who controls the finances of the UK? The City of London. Who controls the land and the seas? The monarchy. Who controls the national doctrine? Whitehall. And who controls the political establishment? The aristocracy. But for now, this has been the Age Case. Big yourselves up.